Hey guys, it's Chris here with Off-Road Farm. Today we're going to be tearing into this SPICER 10-speed. It's out of a dump truck. The guy who brought it to us says that it is popping out of gear, so we're going to tear it down, see if we can find some broken parts, and we do. And we're going to try to get it fixed. Follow along. We have quite a bit of excitement during this build. We try to break my camera. Then we try to put a new hole in the shop floor. And leave a comment down below. What do you think we caught when we went fishing with this John Deere?
I bet.
After we get the transmission on the table, we need to grab it by the back end so we can set it down. This is my father-in-law's transmission table. It's got a hole there for the input shaft. Once we get it set up, now we'll just drop it in the hole so we can start tearing it down. First we need to pull everything off the back, so we're going to get the two covers off of the counter shafts. A couple air lines that were left on. We also have to get the back cover off that range box. Now we're going to pull the piston out of the range selector and get the O-rings. Now it's time to get this yoke off. This nut was on there tight. It's a little warm. Now we're going to pull the output bearing cap, and it also has the output seal on it. Now it's time to pull off this rear case. With all the bolts out, now we can start trying to lift this rear case off. Now there is two dowels in this particular case, one on each side. There should be some place so you can pry on. We actually just used a chisel and drove it in there. The most important thing is you want to lift this up as straight as possible, so you got to make sure you have both sides free before you try to lift that off. You want to try to leave everything in the transmission. The only thing you want to pull off is just that rear case. You want to make sure that output shaft and both of those rear counter shafts stay in there. Now that's not necessarily the case with all of these big truck transmissions, but that is the way to do it for this 10-speed. First thing we're going to pull out is the low range drive gear. Next will be the Synchronizer. Now the output shaft. Now we're going to remove this bolt, and that'll let us pull off the clutch gear and also the synchronizing cup. Next, we're going to remove the high range gear. And now we have to get both of these counter shafts and the reverse gear out at the same time. It took us a little bit of trouble. You have to pull up on both of those counter shafts while also pulling up on the reverse gear, and there's like a big thrust washer there. You have to pull all of that stuff up at the same time. It takes two people, but we finally got it. There's that thrust plate, and that's reverse gear. Now we're going to remove this interlock retaining plate and the interlock. Now keep in mind, these are under some spring pressure. There should be 3 springs and 3 check balls behind this plate. So kind of keep a hand over it so stuff doesn't come flying out. Next, we're just going to pull off this air control valve. And there should also be 3 valve pins in here. We need to pull those off and set those to the side. Now we're pulling off the oil pump. It actually wasn't even hooked up, so we'll hook it back up when we put it back together. And there's also some bearing retainer plates. These help set the preload on the bearings and the main counter shafts. And now it's time to finally start unbolting the main case. So we've almost got the main case ready to lift up, but before we do, there's still 2 more bolts we need to pull out. You have to actually access them from the bell housing, so don't forget about those. So just like the rear case, this main case, it will have 2 dowel pins, 1 on each side. So put just a little bit of lifting pressure on it, and then we're going to drive some chisels and some screwdrivers in there, get it started. And same thing, we need to make sure we have both sides loose. And then once we finally have them off those dowels, we can really carefully lift that up. We try to leave everything attached. We don't want to accidentally grab something when we're lifting that main case off. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull out the reversed and first shift collar and shift rail, because reverse gear is out of the way. It was actually in the rear case. Now we're going to spread these counter shafts apart, and that's actually first gear on top, second gear on bottom. Now we're going to pull out the 2-3 shift collar and shift rail, and then that'll be third gear, and then that's fourth gear. Now we'll pull out 4-5 shift collar and shift rail, and as you can see, it just kind of slid off. That's where we started finding some problems. That's the shifting collar. And now we're just going to leave fifth gear in the transmission. There's a bracket that it bolts to down here, and this is our issue. So hold on just a second and I'll show you. Hammer that like button. So we got the transmission apart. Let me show you what we found. So this is the 4-5 shift bar and shift fork. It attaches to this bracket that should only be one piece. The 2-piece bracket is a special limited edition. So that bracket was broke, and this fork attaches to this bracket.
and that's what was making it pop out of gear. There should also be some shift shoes that are in here. So we've got all new parts and we're getting ready to put it back together.
So we got a new shift fork to put on this shift bar. Removing the old one's real easy. Just pull off the clip, drop the pin out, slide the fork off, slide the new fork on, put the new pin in, put the new clip on. Now do be careful when you're removing those clips. They're really small. If you spread them too far, like I did with the one I was taking off, you'll bend them out of shape and they won't hold. So I wasn't too careful with the one I was taking off, but I am very careful on this new one that I'm putting back on, only spreading it as much as I absolutely need to get it in the groove. Now that we got our new shift fork on, we have to put on these shifting shoes. Once we get those put on, we're just going to go ahead and test fit it on the new shifting collar. We got all new shifting collars, and just make sure that it's going to fit on there.
Just like that.
This new support bracket's a little bit different than the old one. It actually has an extra third bolt that goes through the support bracket for the shift bars. So I'm guessing they've had some problems with this. That's probably why this bracket is new, but it's kind of interesting. Our old bracket broke on the other side. But we're going to get it bolted in there. We're going to torque these down to, I believe, 40 foot-pounds. And now we can start putting everything back together. So we're going to start with the 4-5 shift rail. We'll have to slide that into place, and then there's a pin that we have to put through that bracket and then put a clip on. So now we're trying to clean up these gears. We were trying to find some existing timing marks, but we couldn't find any, so we had to make our own. Now the way this particular transmission goes together, it's kind of a pain to see these timing marks once you start stacking stuff in there, but just take your time. Make sure every time after you put one gear in, you try to rotate it, make sure it works. Now in order to get these gears in here, you have to lean these two counter shafts outward and then stick the gears in. So you have to drop it down in, do your best to get it in the timing mark, and then the problem we had was when we went to go to the next gear, when we pulled those two counter shafts apart, it fell down on us and we lost everything we had in time, so we had to start over. So we just stuck a rag underneath that shift fork and that'll hold that gear in, and now we can start stacking gears back. Now we're going to put in the 2-3 shift fork and shift collar. Same thing, now we're going to time these gears, and then we'll drop in second gear and then first gear.
So you gotta have a little bit of pliers, though. Yeah. They do take it easy with this. You never need to watch them a long time. They left up to them.
This is first gear. Now it's time for the first reversed shift fork and shift collar. Now we're just going to try to individually make sure all these gears, all the shift collars are engaging one at a time.
Hey guys, if you feel like you've learned anything from any of my videos, or if you like the videos, or if you just want to support the channel, do me a favor, check out my Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Maybe considering donating $1 or $2. Every little bit helps, and I really appreciate any and all support you guys can give.
We're just going to clean up all these mating surfaces. That's just a conditioning disc on there. After we get everything cleaned up, we'll get ready to seal it. Now that is not silicone, that is Loctite 515, which is called Flange Sealant. It's a lot different than silicone, sets up a lot harder. It works really good for these transmissions. So we're going to start bolting this main case back together. You want to start at the dowels and then work around. Now we're going to torque these down. These main case bolts get torqued down to 100 foot-pounds. Same thing, you want to start at the dowels and then work around. Now we're going to put in the oil pump retaining plate. This also holds in the bearing race. Now we're just going to bolt in the 2 reverse gears on the counter shafts. And they get torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Now it's time for the oil pump. And these get torqued to 40 foot-pounds. So now we have to get both rear counter shafts plus reverse gear with that thrust plate in there, and you have to drop all that stuff in at the same time. Now there might be a special tool that you can use. We don't work on enough 10 speeds to justify buying a tool, and really don't even look to see if there's one available. So we just took our time. We got one side in with a reverse gear, and we were able to just kind of pry up on it, and we were eventually able to walk that other counter shaft over till we finally got it in the bearing. This is the high range gear. You need to make sure it's in time as well. It's a little bit easier because everything's so tight at this point. There's really not enough room to get it off. Now the Synchronizer cup and the clutch drive gear. Now we'll tighten up this rear shift bar support bracket and torque it down to 40 foot-pounds. And this is just high strength Loctite on this bolt. And that gets torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Now it's time for the output shaft. Synchronizer and the shift port for the synchronizer. Now these are some bearings that go on the output shaft. This is the low range drive gear. Now we're going to put some more bearings and some spacers on, and then we're going to get the very back of this case up on the table so we can start cleaning it up. So on the back of this case you actually have 4 separate mating surfaces. Then we're going to flip it over. We're going to do the big mating surface. And same thing, we're going to be using Loctite 515 Flange Sealant. The rod on this range shifter is really tight when it fits through the hole in the case. So we were just using a pry bar and just kind of wiggling it back and forth as we drop that case down, and that lets everything kind of line up. So here you can see me, I'm doing the same thing, just wiggling that shift fork a little bit, and you can see it's kind of walking down, and there it is. So now we're just going to bolt this rear part of the case to the main case, and once we get everything in, it'll be time to torque them down, and they get torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Don't forget to put your O-rings back on this range selector. There'll be a little one there by the threads, and there'll be the piston, and there'll also be one around the inside lip. More flange sealant, and we'll use that on everything on the back end too. So it'll be the two countershaft covers, this range selector cover, and then also the output seal and speedo sensor. Plenty of Loctite on this yoke nut. We don't want that thing coming off. Now we're just going to reposition this transmission. Whenever we set it on its belly, it'll make it a lot easier to put all those check ball springs and interlock plate back on. And there's also an air valve you have to put on too. And I just got really lucky here. I just happened to be on this side of the transmission, and I was able to grab my camera tripod right before it bit it. They didn't bring us the shifter whenever they brought us this transmission, so we're just using a screwdriver here, and we're just going to take our time. We're going to go through all of the gears now that we have everything back together, make sure everything will shift, and we can hit all these different gears. Now we're just going to use an air nozzle, and we're going to check and make sure this range box is working correctly. I'm going to make sure it shifts back and forth into high and low. Alright, so it looks like we have both high range and low range working. And the funny thing is, once we both quit doing anything, it tries to fall off the table. But luckily, we were able to kind of pin it there and hold it, and he was able to get it hooked up to the lift, and we got it back on top of the table. I think the only reason I was able to hold this thing was the fear of my wife if I let a transmission fall on her dad. So I made sure I did not let go of that thing. Alright, so some more flange sealant for the air control valve. This air control valve, it has 3 pins in it, and whenever you shift your range box, it'll throw air to that valve, but the valve will not let the range shift until the transmission is completely in neutral. So those pins actually have some detents in the shift bars, and they will not fall down until all 3 of the shift bars are in the neutral position. Then it'll let your range box shift. Here's those valve pins. And now the air control valve. Now it's time for the interlock plate. Once we get this interlock plate back on this transmission, we're done. We're ready to strap it to a pallet, give it back to the customer. You can see when he raises it up, we've got another one sitting on the floor. This one is a 13 speed. It came out of a local quarry here. It's their water truck. They're having the exact opposite problem. It won't come out of here. So we'll have a later video on that, but let's find out what we caught when we took a John Deere fishing. This is my nephew Connor. He graciously got voluntold to go down in the water and get wet and hook a strap to this thing, so thank you to him for getting wet so I didn't have to. Now this is not one of ours. This is actually one of our neighbors, one of our good neighbors. They had some family out of town visiting, had some people that weren't really experienced on a four-wheeler or side-by-side, and they had a little accident. They were very fortunate. They were both wearing their seat belts, and they're fortunate they went off that side of the bridge. If they'd have went off the other side of the bridge, it is significantly deeper, and they might have drowned. But fortunately, no one was hurt. There was just a few bruises from some seat belts. We were able to get it pulled out of here without pretty much any problems at all. Did do quite a bit of damage to the front end. You'll be able to see it here in just a second. The passenger side front and both control arms were broke. It might have torn up an axle, but fortunately most of the motor was out of the water, and the neighbors already started rebuilding it. He was able to drain all the fluids out and has actually had it cranked up, and right now he's just waiting on parts to rebuild that front end. So thanks everybody for watching. Leave a comment down below. Did you think we were going to pull a Polaris Ranger out of a pond?
Whoa, whoa.